Man, the Falcons let the cat out of the bag.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste, alongside me are Jarvis Davis, Aaron Freeman, and Tori McElhaney. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And our Atlanta Football Party is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Falcons do a lot of prove-it deals, but is a certain list waiting for them to prove it before giving them a top ranking? We'll talk about that. And Kirk issued a challenge he thinks the young guard can live up to. But first, let's talk about D-Day in Flowery. Jarvis, the only cut day of the preseason is Tuesday. The Falcons have started to trim their roster ahead of that 53-man deadline, including releasing about 13 players Sunday. But for you, did anyone on that list so far surprise you?
Absolutely not. Because when you think about it, I feel like the Falcons have let the cat out of the bag, man. They're taking the fun out of roster projections because, like, pretty much everybody who didn't play is going to make the team, because it's just like, and that's what kind of sucks about this whole changing of the guard when it comes to preseason for me, because I'm just like, man, I just miss those days of just really just diving into who could potentially make this squad. But I feel like Raheem Morris has given us the blueprint of what preseason is going to look like. A lot more value in joint practices, and a lot of stock going to be put into those versus the game. So I feel like now it's just a matter of when you saw these guys come out, the list come out, it's like no surprise at all, right? So, and then only thing that kind of shook me just a little bit was the Bradley Anai, because I feel like he's a guy that could potentially, would be a candidate you can probably bring back on the practice squad. But other than that, it was just like, man, the Falcons are just they're just taking all the fun out of it. I know it's Christmas Day, you know what I'm saying? But it's just like, all right, okay, I know who's going to make the squad, but when it comes to going through this process, it feels like it's not as exhilarating as it used to be for me.
So Tori and Aaron, we're going to go in that direction instead. I'll ask you, Tori, how about for you? Did you feel like kind of the tea leaves were already there because of the way the roster or the rosters were kind of crafted throughout preseason? And how was that for you? Did you like it? Do you not like how it proceeded? And then tell me if you saw any surprises.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, the 53-man roster projection over the last probably like 4 or 5 years that I've been covering this team has been a lot more difficult than it was this year. A 53-man roster projection this year was like, I mean, I could probably do it in my sleep without any issue at all, just because of the nature and the way that this team is constructed currently. I know. Whereas in years past, especially right when Terry Fontenot and this front office got in here, it was all about piecing together a 53-man roster on guys on one-year deals that are cap friendly, kind of these middle veteran deals, mid-level vet deals, and that's how you're piecing it together. And so there was a lot more kind of question about who was going to make this 53-man roster to a certain extent. Now, like, you're not cutting some of these guys. Like, you're paying them the money. You went out and got them for a reason. You traded for them. Like, you drafted them. Like, a lot of the players that will make this 53-man roster leave no doubt that they're going to be there. So you really, really were. It boiled down to maybe guys fighting for 2, maybe 3 spots. And that's a hard maybe. Instead of talking about 15 spots that could go kind of any direction, you're talking about 2, and that makes a difference. So for me, there was no surprises at all. I do think that some of these guys that they did release over the last 24 hours, I feel like hopefully they've shown enough over the course of 3 preseason games that even they could potentially go somewhere else, find a different landing spot, and go from there. So there wasn't any surprises. Like, it's more along the lines of, like, the question is whether or not they're going to keep Taylor Heineke as a third quarterback. The question is what happens to someone like a Damone Harris or D'Angelo Malone? Like those are the questions. You're talking about, again, 1 or 2 spots. You're not talking about 10.
Yeah. And I think that's a great call too, Aaron, because Tori's right. In the last couple of years, we may have been talking about position battles, but for a different reason, because you kind of had, and I hope this doesn't sound too negative or disrespectful, but it was kind of like, okay, the lesser of the evils, for example, versus say the best of the best, which is what Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris have started to construct this past offseason. So maybe it may not have been as fun, like Jarvis said, as maybe the last couple of years where it was like player shuffle and you don't quite kind of know who you're going to get. But coupling what they did in the offseason with what we saw in training camp or joint practices or even some of those preseason games, maybe it isn't as much of a surprise, if you will, as maybe it would have been in past years.
Yeah, I think Tori nailed it. It's, I've been looking at everybody else's 53-man roster projections over the last 10 days, and it basically differs by like 2 or 3 guys. It's like those last 2 or 3 guys that you think are going to be on the roster as opposed to somebody else. And it's like we all kind of agree on the general numbers in terms of how many players at each position. It's just you swap out Kevin King for that guy, you swap out D'Angelo Malone for that guy, that sort of thing. I think in the sense of surprises, like, no surprises in the sense of nobody that got cut you thought was going to make the roster. But if you're doing these sort of staggered cuts where it's just like, okay, we're going to cut the guys that we're probably, in this initial group, probably are not going to bring these guys back for the practice squad, and our 16-man practice squad are probably going to come from the next 24 or so cuts that they're going to make. That's the only real surprise, because a couple of these guys like Lucas Dennis, I thought was probably a guy that could make the practice squad just because he's been a fixture on their special teams throughout the preseason over maybe some other safeties like Trey Tarpley or Josh Thompson. I'm sorry. And whatnot. But like, other than that, it's like, oh, I thought this guy would be a front runner for the practice squad versus this other guy. But that's really kind of like that's really where the mystery is at. It's like, who are going to be the 16 guys that the Falcons put on the practice squad? And if we sat here and did that, it probably will differ by more than 2 or 3 guys like the roster is. Like, we might swap out like 10 names or something like that. But that's really kind of where the mystery is, as Jarvis said. Like, Raheem has sort of taken it all out by basically sitting, 40 guys over the last 2 weeks. And it's like, we know those 40 guys are making it. And it's just like, and we kind of know who the last like 10 out of the next 13 are going to make it. So, I know Tori, as a fan or non-fan, I should say, of preseason, probably appreciates a lot more than Jarvis does. So it is interesting.
I do. Y'all know I don't care at all about this at all. Your girl is done with it. She's done.
Tori's so fun.
Preseason is number 1 on the list.
Get it out of here.
No, Tori, like, you don't remember the Victor Cruz movements? Oh my gosh. I know it was a long time ago. It's nostalgia for me. Like, come on.
My thing is that, like, I don't care. Let's get to the freaking regular season. Like, these are professionals. These are grown men. Just put the ball down and play.
Oh, it's just killing me.
Tori is officially on her Mike Tomlin. I do not care when it comes to preseason, and I am not mad at her for that. Well, T, keeping with the petty, we're going to stick with the petty because that's where we are right now. Bijan Robinson joined the Up and Adams show recently and said Zach Robinson, quote, listens to the players. Now, he also said he's most looking forward to, speaking of the Steelers, that Steelers game, which will be week 1, and saying hi to Arthur Smith, but then he's going to keep it moving. Now, just for kicks and giggles, T, are you reading between the lines on this one? And is this Bijan's subtle way of saying he wanted more touches last year than maybe he got?
Here's the thing. I don't think that Bijan has, and I tweeted this when I tweeted out this quote from him. I don't think Bijan Robinson has a shade throwing bone in his body. I don't think this man, who is one of the brightest little joys in life, who walks around with the biggest smile on his face, who has never been mean to anything, maybe save a mosquito, but maybe not even a mosquito. Like, I don't think that he meant it the way that people are taking it to mean. Everybody else can have their opinion. If they feel like that's what he meant when he said it, like, whatever, to each their own. I don't think Bijan, in his heart of hearts, like, would put someone on blast on a public forum like that. I don't think that's who he is or what he would do. Now, what does he feel behind closed doors? Who knows? But I just don't think that would be an avenue for which he would air out, dirty laundry, to say.
Yeah, and Free, I think that both can be true. Like, I think that you can not be throwing shade at Arthur Smith and be giving kudos to Zach Robinson all at the same time. That's kind of how I read it. I think he was more like it was just a breath of fresh air for Zach Robinson, but not saying that Arthur Smith necessarily stunk up the joint. I agree with Tori. I don't think that's his way, but I love the fact that just like he's kind of a breath of fresh air for most people, it's just kind of maybe him giving an ode to Zach to say he's a breath of fresh air for listening.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right way to read it. I agree with Tori. Like, I can't imagine Bijan throwing shade at really anybody. Like someone could kick his puppy and he'd be like, "Hey, how you doing?" Like he's not that type of dude.
Hey,
like
man.
he would hold any ill will towards a person. And I think it's interesting I'm sure there are plenty of Falcon players in the locker room that have no love lost for Arthur Smith. You kind of see that evidenced by the grades that he got. I think he had like a C+ last year from the player NFLPA grades, and that was like in the bottom 2 or 3. So clearly he wasn't necessarily beloved by everybody in that locker room. But at the same time, like you see the exodus of Falcon players that followed him to Pittsburgh. So clearly it wasn't like everybody was hating Arthur Smith in that regard. So I'm sure there are certainly players that if they had been given Bijan's platform and opportunity to throw shade at Arthur Smith, they would have more than willing of sort of pull the trigger on that. But it is going to be interesting to sort of see, how the players deal with this upcoming game. Is there a little bit extra fire in the belly of some of the Falcon players? Like, I think when we break down week 1, regardless of what the result of the game is, if we can look at a certain couple of guys in that game that like they really came out firing out of the gates, maybe we could read something into that based off of their play where it's like, hey, I never saw this from you last year. Where was this fire at some point? So those are, to me, going to be the interesting conversations we have maybe Monday after that Steelers game.
Now, would it be shady for me to be like not pleased that all those players were taken from Hartsfield Jackson to Pittsburgh International? Okay, Jarvis, your turn to be petty.
You know what? I think those comments, not necessarily those comments were, as far as, I don't think that these are Bijan's intentions. But what I do think that those comments highlight Arthur Smith's downfall. I feel like he was a little bit stubborn when it comes to the whole fantasy football comment, when people were asking about using Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, which it makes sense. Like, you drafted the tight end the highest that's ever been drafted in the history of the league. So yeah, we're going to ask him why you're not using that dude in the red zone. So yeah, so it makes sense. So, but I feel like, overall that, it opens things up for us to, and I don't think he was thinking that way, but it does highlight what Arthur Smith, his downfall was. And that is, from a communication standpoint, I just felt like he wasn't the greatest communicator of all, which is kind of weird as you're an offensive coordinator in the NFL and you're talking to grown men. Like, you got to be able to communicate in a way where those guys respect. And obviously, like Aaron mentioned, I feel like those are some of the things that didn't necessarily help him keep his job, and I think that overall, these guys are going to come out, and I feel like Bijan Robinson may be trying to pump himself quietly, say, hey man, I need about 25 touches, and 20 of them can be, running the football, and I can handle that. And I feel like that's going to be the game plan going in, and I feel like he's going to be more than willing to execute that.
Yeah, some people are going to experience overthinking in a way that they've never experienced it before. So, major moves only get you a bump. We'll debrief when we talk about it in Under Further Review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. Now, in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Now, terms and conditions do apply, but do what 2.5 million small businesses are doing, and that's using LinkedIn for hiring, because with LinkedIn, it helps you to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. So, Tori, we're still kind of sort of in list season. So the Falcons, of course, finished the 2023 season 20th in ESPN's list of power rankings. Now, you would think a massive upgrade at QB, significant investments on offense and defense should mean that the NFC South presumptive favorites deserve maybe a bump in the rankings, but not according to the power rankings for 2024. ESPN bumped them up to 19. I'm not good with that. What are you? How do you feel?
I mean, I'm kind of indifferent about it. They've not done anything yet. We have not seen this team go even close to 100%. We have no idea what this offense is going to realistically look like. We have no idea how Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons are going to go and play with this defense after only being here for a couple of weeks. I go back to something that AJ Terrell said on Friday night after the game, after the final preseason game, and he said, on paper, we're really, really good. We're a really good roster. Many guys have said that. Taylor Heineke said that. Grady Jarrett has said that. Jesse Bates has said it. Every single person has said, on paper, this roster is a dang good roster. But on paper means absolutely nothing in week 8. So when it all comes down to it, this team has not shown anything yet. And that's okay. We haven't needed them to. There's been no need to show anything to this point. But we're getting close to where we're going to be able to see. And so for the time being, I'm fine if everybody wants to rank them where they rank them and kind of have all these different conversations about, the NFC South and its level of competition, especially in comparison to other divisions. I get it. 100% I get it. So in saying that, it's fine. Do what you got to do. They haven't shown anything yet, so fair game.
Yeah. And I think for me, Free, the postulating, because it's really postulating on just about everybody but the Kansas City Chiefs, if we're being honest, because they're the only ones that have a Super Bowl ring on their hands for yet a second year in a row. But I think when I saw teams like the Cleveland Browns, the Los Angeles Rams, hell, even the Jacksonville Jaguars ahead of them, and even the New York Jets, because Aaron Rodgers still has only had, one snap with them in the regular season. I think that's where I was just like, how what are we doing here? How are we thinking? But I do see Tori's point as well that, the Falcons have not taken the field as this new look Falcons team. I just think some of the teams that they put ahead of them in that list, I was like, how do you rank them that way? But anywho, that said, what are your thoughts on where the Falcons still landed on the power rankings this season so far?
Well, I am your humble hater, the host of Locked On Falcons. And I feel like 18 to 20 is right for the Falcons. So this doesn't bother me at 19. This is right in the sweet spot where I think, based off of what Tori's saying, I agree. The Falcons have to prove it. 6 years without a playoff. So when, teams like the Rams and Browns, who made the playoffs last year, and Browns had the best defense in the NFL.
They made the playoffs last year. Okay, I digress. Continue.
Okay. But it is one of those things where, it's so much based off of what you did last year, right? With these power rankings and whatnot. And, even when we get to the season, it's all about what you did last week, not what you're going to do this week. So, I'm not too bothered by the Falcons not necessarily getting the benefit of the doubt at this point in time, because we've been trying to push them up power rankings and all this stuff for 6 years now, and they just can't seem to break that. So I can understand why someone might be a little bit more skeptical, being like, okay, well, are we going to vote for the Falcons again for the 7th time in a row or whatever. So I don't have a problem with them with what their ranking is. I think a lot of it, you just got to prove it out there on the football field. And the Falcons will be in the spotlight early in the season with multiple primetime games. So they will have every opportunity to show that it's not just, what they are on paper, as Tori put it, it's what they are on the football field.
Yeah, and that's fair, Jarvis. I suppose, the team they play in week 1, for example, did kind of sort of get to the playoffs, something like that. So, hey, yeah, I understand. But interesting. What are your thoughts on where they landed?
I think this ranking kind of speaks to how the fan base feels deep down, because I kind of put some feelers out there on Twitter one time. And I was just talking about, like, right after the Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons trade, I was like, hey, I know it's kind of hard for y'all to get excited. For those fans who've been fans of this team for more than 10 years, you feel me, you understand. So, and I feel like if you did a poll of, like, your deep down in your soul really feels and thoughts, you're just like, yeah, man, something is about to happen. So yeah, they need to stay exactly right there, because I don't want too much attention on this team, because as soon as they start getting all the hype, that's when they start losing. So, I think that they are right where they need to be from the fan base standpoint, because, me being a part of it, growing up in the city, I understand. I get it. I've rooted for this team, a long time ago, and I seen, a player, get arrested for soliciting a prostitute the night before the Super Bowl. And then I've seen, a 28-3, situation go down. So when you've been a part of the fan base and watching those, being part of those events and being, like, really feeling it, like, you understand why they're ranked right there. And I think that, like Aaron mentioned, when you talk about what this team has done before, how these preseason rankings, kind of go to field, I feel like when it comes to the Falcons, they put in organizational history when they do these rankings. So it's like they're not going to give anyone any credit anytime soon, and I'm cool with that. So let's get these games going.
Right. But real talk, actually, they did, full disclosure, did put that ranking in place ahead of the Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons official signings. So I do think that should be taken into consideration as to how they landed at 19. And then the rationale also was ahead of, before they heard about, or didn't take into consideration, the announcement about AJ Terrell and kind of getting his contract squared away. That said, speaking of Matthew Judon, another list that the Falcons, the ESPN did put out about the Falcons and the top 50 pass rushers and top 10 duos in the league did surround Matthew Judon. They are projecting him to come in at number 10 out of the top 50 pass rushers with a projected sack total of 10. So, Tori, for you, 2 questions real quick. And you guys, if we could do it real quick round robin, does this seem to be a reasonable expectation for Judon to get 10 sacks? And if you had to project kind of a pass rush duo for the Falcons, who would be in tandem with Judon?
Grady Jarrett. I think this is a guy who's coming back for year 10, like on a completely another level. And then 2, the first question, the 10 sacks. Sure. Like, why not? Why not have that expectation
12,
of
14
sacks? Yeah, why not?
Come on.
Sure.
All that. I think for me, like, it better be AK, right? Can it be AK-47? I mean, 47, sorry. 17, can it be Arne Ebiketie? Like, I'm really excited for him, because I feel like, him being paired with Matthew Judon on that edge on third down, it's going to benefit him so much. And I love the fact that I'm hearing about him talking about how he's been helping out Judon, like, when it comes to, like, the calls and everything like that. And he kind of understands, like, how he can help him and how Judon can help him out, so you have that mutually beneficial relationship going on situation. So, like, when you have a guy that's that experienced, it kind of reminds me of the whole Vic Beasley, Dwight Freeney situation. We understand when Freeney came into the fold, what he did to try to help Vic, in that 1 year. I feel like, man, this is the opportunity, a prime opportunity for unadvocated to be able to take advantage of a guy like Judon. And we even seen Zach Harrison benefit from Calais Campbell being in the fold last year. So I just think that is such a beneficial thing that they can come through with.
Yeah, for me, Judon getting projected 10 sacks, that seems pretty spot on. It's nice to have someone projected to get 10 sacks in Atlanta for the first time in forever. And as far as tandems go, I hear what Jarvis is saying. I think if you're looking at pure sack totals, it should be Arnold Ebiketie because he's probably projected to get more sacks than Grady Jarrett. But in terms of the guy that, like, if you're an offensive coordinator and you're game planning against, is Grady Jarrett is that other guy up front that you're most worried about at this point than, Arnold Ebiketie at this point. So I feel like both Tori and Jarvis nailed it in that regard.
I'm just glad that we're having that conversation about the fact that there can be a pass rush tandem for the Falcons. Kirko has issued a challenge he thinks the young guard can live up to. We'll talk about it and what's next. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. Why? Because it's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different to let you guys know about today. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's right. We said all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a free 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from both YouTube and YouTube TV. Now, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook. Again, that's FanDuel.com/locked-on to download the #1 sportsbook in America. Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel and is programmed to bring you the biggest stories daily without all the noise. Locked On Sports Today also brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news 24/7 streaming on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Aaron, Kirk Cousins said in a recent interview, quote, "I'll be ready to go week 1. He also said, quote, "I just like our group. It's kind of my job to be a point guard and distribute to a really talented group. Younger players who I think can really go to another level. I'm going to challenge them to do that." So how important is it that the Falcons have a QB1 who has the ability to actually challenge his offense and also actually get results?
I think it's extremely important. It's been something I talked about on Locked On Falcons going all the way back to like December of last year, which is like having a grown up in that room. And this is no just knock on Desmond Ridder or anything like. He was a young player basically in his rookie season. So you can't really expect him to have that sort of like stabilizing impact on his offense like a 12-year veteran like Kirk Cousins can do. But I think having that sort of grown up in this room that has been around the block, that knows what it's like, knows what a top 10 offense looks like because he's helmed those, is going to be so valuable for many of these young players. I think that was a real big issue for the Falcons last year. They were so young, they didn't know what they didn't know. And I think Kirk Cousins knows what he knows at this point in time and can be that sort of leader and be like, okay, we need to get here. This is what it looks like, right? He can go to Drake London and be like, hey, I played with the best wide receiver in the league in Justin Jefferson. I know what this looks like. Or he can build off of his relationship with Adam Thielen or Stephon Diggs. He's played with good tight ends like Kyle Rudolph and TJ Hawkinson. So that's something that he can, in Jordan Reed in Washington, right? He can use those guys as examples for Kyle Pitts, and he's played with great running backs like Dalvin Cook and others, and that's something that he can, throw at Bijan Robinson and whatnot. So I think with Kirk, you're getting someone who's been around the block, and that I think is going to do wonders for a lot of these young players who are just kind of looking for that stabilizing force. That was the problem with last year's team, going back to the conversation about Arthur Smith, where you had all these young pieces, you didn't really know what you were going to get in it, and you were expecting Arthur Smith as the head coach and the play caller to kind of be the grown-up that could distribute and do all the things that he needed to do to get all these players in the mix. And you don't, not to say anything about Zach Robinson, but now you have that in the quarterback room. You have the same thing, hopefully, in a play caller in Zach Robinson. He can do that sort of thing. So those are the things I think that really benefit a very young offense at the skill position players. And I think Kirk is kind of the perfect guy to be that QB1 that we're talking about that can stabilize everything and, show all these young guys the ropes.
Yeah, and Tori, we kind of saw it in the third preseason game where late in the game, Kirk still had on his helmet. Of course, he didn't play per se, and people were kind of chuckling about him having the helmet on. But the more important thing was kind of the intensity, in a good way, of the conversation that you saw him having with Drake London. And even though we don't know exactly what was said, there was just a command that you could feel, like a presence in that conversation, as Free mentioned, relative to what maybe we had seen in the recent past.
Yeah, I mean, I know people were joking about, like, him having his helmet on the sideline and everything without his pads on, but, like, the reason he was doing that was so he could hear Zach Robinson and, like, the cadence and the play call and relaying it to Drake London and talking through it and having those conversations. Like, that's why he did it. I think people were just like, "Oh, he's like Kirk Cousins, just stays ready, Kirk being kooky
Right.
Kirk, blah, blah, blah." Like, no, he actually was doing it for a reason.
Doing some work,
And
y'all.
yeah, so I do think that there's been this difference immediately. Like, as soon as Kirk got here, you felt something was shifting and something was different. And I think it goes back to too, like, the accuracy that Kirk Cousins presents in the pocket. That was something that Darnell Mooney, I was talking to him in OTAs, and he said this then, even when they're going on 7-on-7 in the air. Like, he made the comment, he's like, "I just need to make sure I'm in the right spot. Kirk's gonna get me the ball. The ball's gonna be there. It's up to me to get there, to be there." And I think, like, that is very different than kind of the conversation we've been having around the quarterback position in the last couple of years since Matt Ryan has no longer been here. It's now you feel like an ease and a comfort and, like, honestly, like, a responsibility of Kirk Cousins that he reaches, to get the ball in the hands of his playmakers. And
Yeah.
he understands that too. So I think because of that, you feel a difference again immediately.
And I think the biggest person who's going to benefit from Kirk the most being in the fold, it has to be Kyle Pitts. Because when you think about a veteran quarterback that understands the offense, not only understands it, able to process it, and then be able to spew it out on the field like the coach wants to, and how he wants to, and how he visualize how that offense should be operating as well. I think that, you know, being like that, being in that situation, and Kyle never really being in that situation. No shade towards Marcus Mariota or Desmond Ritter, but you know, Kirk has a very good understanding of how things are supposed to play out. You know, and for him, Kyle, to be talking about how, yeah, man, he told me I need to be in this spot. And hey, I know I like Tori mentioned with when talking about Darnell Mooney. And when you have a guy that's not only willing to let you know where you need to be, but to challenge you as well. Like the numbers and all that stuff speaks for itself, but you still got to go and be able to verbalize it, like, hey man, you're faster than that. Hey man, did you run that route as fast as you possibly could? Yeah, I need you to do that, you know, and for him to be able to, not a coach say that, but it's a difference when you're versus a coach saying something like that versus your actual peer saying something like that. That means they understand you. That means they've watched film on you and they know that you're more than capable of doing more when it comes to that type of stuff. So yeah, I think overall, this Kyle is going to benefit a lot from Kirk, and he should have a nice season this year because of it.
Yeah, he'll have the benefit of having a Matthew, like a return to what he was able to have with Matt Ryan. And I think to your point, that'll be good for Drake London to be able to have a quarterback like like Kirk Cousins, that he's able. I mean, we saw glimpses of it, but now you're probably going to see that on a more consistent basis. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. And be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons for your second listen. Be sure to also like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow on the Atlanta Football Party, the Dogs Edition.